This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, this is Bill Bellows with the In2 InThinking Network's monthly webinar series, which we started in September. And this month we have Miss Jaime Marie joining us from Costa Rica. And she's doing a giving us a taste of what she'll be doing at the close of the In2 InThinking Network's 2026 forum set for third weekend in July. Jaime, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, Bill, thank you very much. So my name is Jaime Marie, and in a lot of my work spheres, I go by J Marie, but as the overused joke says, just don't call me late for meals. Especially if there's some chocolate, and if you're offering up some chocolate in there, like for sure, I would like to be included in that invitation. So I have been an In2 regular since I think I cannot remember now if I started on the second or the third year of the forum, but from very early in the forums starting, I joined in and have gone to more than half of them over the years. And the last dozen years or so, one of my roles has often been what I think of as being kind of a closer. So I often facilitate the final session of the forum. And part of what we do in terms of how, and I say we because it's often I have a buddy with me most years, but I always collaborate tightly with the planning team. And part of the purpose of the way we approach the closer is to give participants an opportunity to make meaning of the time that they spend coming together for the forum. That's a big investment for most of us. Many of us who go to the forum have to travel a fair distance. We got to get time off from work. There's just a lot of logistics that go into it. So it's a real dedication to be there in person with one another. And I have a bias that I want us to be able to make the most of that time. So often we go to conferences or attend a workshop, like a 1 hour session once a month. And we go in and we think about something interesting and we're like, yeah, that's pretty cool. And we might even get a little sparkle of an idea about how that interesting thing might relate to our day-to-day lives. But the odds that we're going to take that thing, that idea, that information out of the context of the workshop or the forum or the conference that you go to and bring it back with you to your real life is actually pretty small unless you take time to build the meaning at that time, to kind of like build a bridge from that idea to your day-to-day life. And so that's what we do with that closing session is we build a bridge from the interesting things and the interesting conversations you had back to how you're going to make use of it. And I've begun to borrow a phrase from an old boss of mine who would say, what's the so what of this? So today, what we're going to do is kind of borrow from other thinkers that have inspired me and that I think are relevant in today's world. And I'm going to pose some questions that you can make good use of to tie whatever it is you're doing, either personally or organizationally. How do you make meaning out of that thing? How do you make it relevant? How do you or demonstrate its relevance? And then how do you keep coming back to it? How do you cut through the clutter of the whirlwind that we're in these days? The pace of change has changed. And that is affecting our efficacy as humans because we're still rocking the same evolutionary brain that we were rocking 100 years ago, but the world that we're rocking it in is entirely different. So that's a little bit of context for what we're gonna spend our hour thinking about and talking with each other about here today. So before we go further, I'd like to pause and give us an opportunity to introduce ourselves. And I will just call you out in the order I see you on my screen. So Mike G, would you please go next?
Sure. I got exposure to the In2 Thinking Network for the first time last year in July. Got drawn in, sucked into this ecosystem, and have thoroughly enjoyed it. Helping plan for 2026 forum, which is starting to ramp up here. I spent the majority of my career as an executive for family-owned businesses in the 60 to probably $300 million range. Learned a lot, mostly on the operations side of the business. And it's just fun as a consultant now, really refining my thinking by engaging in these, sometimes weekly events that In2 is putting on. So I'm looking forward to today's presentation.
Boy, I'm glad you're here. Diane. Oh, you're still muted, friend. Please start over.
Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry about that. So I've been with the In2 network probably since about its inception. So more than 20 years. And I worked with Bill at Rocketdyne. That's where we met and I first got involved. I'm in the quality and regulatory fields. And sometimes that's at odds with some of the stuff that End-to-End and even Deming talk about on the systems level. So a lot of what drives me is trying to close those distances between philosophies through my work with the End-to-End network. But now I'm getting to a point in my career where I'm looking more to be a guide, a coach, a mentor to the newer generations that are starting to run companies and helping them to at least recognize other ways of doing things beyond the more traditional ones. So interacting with the people at InThinking provides me with an opportunity to better grasp some of those other approaches.
Lovely. Well, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah. Thanks.
Paul.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Paul Morlock, and I retired in August of 2022 now. It's amazing how time goes by. After a 40-plus year career as a healthcare executive, most recently I was the VP of HR at a children's hospital in Norfolk, Virginia, which is where my current home is. Over the course of my career, I actively sought and was grateful for the experience and the knowledge of others, including Bill and the In2 network. Though I hadn't had the opportunity to attend, I always kind of tracked and followed, and actually incorporated as much as I could, or in my regular job duties with Dr. Deming's practices and his management philosophy, and most specifically did work in compensation and replacement of performance appraisal and was very honored to work with Peter Schultes for many years, as well as Mary Jenkins, if you remember Mary from performance appraisal work. Mary and her partner, Howard Stanton, were consultants that I had the pleasure of not only employing and working with, but most specifically learning from over roughly a 10-year period. So even though I'm retired now, I still keep an active interest in this work and others who are trying to apply this work, because it hasn't gotten any easier. I'm confident of that out in the world, but am interested in continuing to learn and help and assist others as best I can.
Lovely. Thank you. Mike Beck.
Greetings, everyone, from sunny Connecticut this afternoon. I've been in the right place at the right time a couple times in my career. Started out at General Motors and General Motors Powertrain when Dr. Deming was asked to take on a special role with us with Gypsy Ranny. And from there, I've had a career applying Deming and that kind of thinking in numerous positions. They've done some consulting I'm retired now and mostly staying interested in helping others as best I can.
That's important work. Thank you for doing it and for joining us. Ian, you're next on my screen, my friend.
Good afternoon. Ian Bradbury in sunny, well, near Hell, Michigan. I'm a recovering statistician. That's kind of how I started my life. And that drew me into General Motors Powertrain Group, where I had the privilege of working with Mike and Mary Jenkins and Dr. Deming and so on for several years. And for the last 29 years, I've been at a company called VUCA Services, where we rebuild locomotive diesel engines and do industrial control system work. So that's been kind of the opportunity to put up or shut up and actually try and apply some of this stuff from a position of responsibility.
Lovely. Yosh, my good friend.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Name is Yoshimuki. I've been associated with Bill's In2 InThinking network probably since 2006 timeframe, I think. At that time, I was a manager of a engineering group at an aerospace company, and I had just gotten through a Six Sigma program, and I realized there was a lot of gaps in the Six Sigma training material, and I was looking for something more, and I stumbled across something that Bill had sent out, and that's how I got involved with the In2, and I saw a whole new world opening up as I was starting that process, and as I adopted more and more of Dr. Deming's practices, or at least his philosophy or his way of thinking, I've discovered that managing a group of people became a whole lot easier. And also, we're actually becoming more and more effective as a group and as a team after doing that. And so since then, I've been kind of sucked into it pretty deeply. I retired in 2020, just before the pandemic hit. Timing was opportune, I guess. But I've been involved with doing a lot of consulting since then. And in addition, most of the core of the consulting is technical, but every once in a while I get to fold in a little bit of that Deming philosophy into what I'm doing to inspire, like I said, teamwork and a different way of problem solving, looking at the world around us. And then, of course, today's topic, VUCA, is always a favorite. Anyways, that's me in a nutshell. Looking forward to your talk, Jamie.
Glad you're here, friend.
Thank you.
Dirk, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name's Dirk Van Putten. I live in Holland, Michigan, on the west coast of the state of Michigan, facing Lake Michigan. I work for Monolithic Power Systems. We make analog integrated circuits, semiconductors. My career has been in quality management systems, and sometime in the early 2000s, I got associated with the Bay Area Deming Group with some people that you all know. I was living in San Jose in Silicon Valley. And then through the BADUG, Bay Area Deming User Group, I became aware of the Deming Electronic Network, the DEN, what was run by Jim Clausen at the time. And that's how I got aligned with Bill Bellows and the In2 thinking. And since then, I have consumed as many minutes of Bill Bellows' time in the In2 thinking as I can. It has transformed me in my thinking and who I am as a person more than any job, boss, or university class I've ever taken. Bill Bellows has had a bigger effect on me than anybody other than maybe my parents. So I'm just thrilled to be here. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's some high praise there, Bill.
Thank you, Derek.
Lovely. Bill Wells, please share a few moments of who you are and why you're here. You're muted, my friend. There we are.
I'm still learning how to try to use technology.
A
But
lifelong opportunity in that.
well, there is, but it's as if the amount of data, but the personal experience of meeting y'all and Bill Bellows and Tim Higgins, it was really for me to work out of mental illness, and Deming would even respond. The question, even in part because I still create art, I would go to art school in Chicago because I'd asked too many questions in Louisville. And it's just strange when you think to be able to integrate the arts and sciences in the very touch of a keyboard and realize you're wired throughout the cosmos, I think. But to keep asking the questions that need to be asked, because you can be silenced if you start asking questions that need to be asked. So I look forward to this discussion. I was able to even write to Norman Cousins years ago when he would respond in a letter. Robert Persig would write back. Deming would write back. And a lady once said to me, really, the great ones will respond to you. So how do you have that space to where the questions can be held and absorbed and dissected and put back together again to understand the whole? So that's it.
That's a gift that you bring, friend, and I appreciate seeing you. It is lovely.
Yes, it is to see y'all.
We've got just a couple folks left. So John, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm John Lenhart. I've been talking to Bill for 3 years. He's been mentoring me. I like to say he's the only guy who loves to talk about the one thing I love to talk about, which is systems. But he's introduced me to another cool group within InThinking, and we've been meeting every month, and they're really innovative people. And so I love this group. I don't want to miss any talks that happen here.
I appreciate that feeling as well, friend. I'm glad you're here. Doug and or Deb, I think y'all will bring it home for us.
Thanks. Good to see everybody. Deborah's at West Point right now for the 50th anniversary commemoration of the introduction of women into the Services Academy and having a great time. And I'm back in Hawaii, so I'm having to suffer clearly. But we love the crew and we love the conversations, and so glad to be here.
Glad you're here. Nice to see you again. So let's jump right in. So this idea of VUCA, things that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I was introduced to this through the InThinking network, through Joel and Michelle Levy. They have been thought leaders and partners of our community for a while now. And they did some work with the military. So in addition to being meditation teachers and mindfulness and present moment awareness teachers, they also are systems thinkers and facilitators and trainers. And so they did some work with the military, and the military was navigating this question of how do you remain effective in times that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And the U.S. Army War College, each of those 4 words could be unpacked in a number of different ways. But I'll tell you from what I've been reading about how they think, and I welcome others' thoughts as well. So if at any point, so we're not going to stand on formality here in this particular group. If you have a thought that you'd like to share that you think is relevant, that helps bring a concept together, please jump right in and or use the chat as Doug has used here. So as the U.S. Army War College was thinking about volatile, you can think about volatility in terms of situations, and certainly that is a valid lens to for that piece of the acronym. but they really frame it around people, kind of what you can expect of people. And some of that, I think, bumps a little bit into encouraging us to reconsider stereotypes, but also they're just inviting leaders to think about where is their volatility. And I think that relates a little bit when they talk about complexity, that's more of a systems view in this VUCA model, whereas I think the volatility is more of a personal view. Look at the volatility of the people involved and what you can expect of them. Uncertainty, they're talking about you start to have lower predictability of the information. And we certainly are seeing that now with AI introduced. Part of what's happened is we've lost our capacity to identify what's real versus what has been created or generated. And I believe that as we become more accustomed to that tool being in use in our work and in our professional and personal lives, we will get better again at being able to identify real from generated. But at this moment, we're in kind of the dip of it, where there is less certainty, less predictability of when we get presented with information. Can we trust it? Can we even trust our eyes? Pictures and video being a particular focus right now, just how good the fakes are. And we haven't yet found that new place where how do we identify what is truth? So we're in this kind of gap. So I would say right now, more than perhaps any time in recent generations, we've got uncertainty as defined by this VUCA model. Complexity, I think, as we get into more of that systems view, how are things interrelated? And the more interrelated something is, the more the capacity for complexity goes up. And ambiguous has to do in this model with potential for misunderstandings and mixed messages. So ambiguity, I think another way to frame that would be lack of clarity. So one of the purposes behind some of the questions we're going to explore here with our time together today is around how do you identify that kind of clarity? Because another interesting thing when I dug into the idea of ambiguity, we've got some research just even added on to, I think it was the McKinsey research, which was completed in 2025, talked about the idea that a very high percentage of leaders feel underprepared because of this sense of ambiguity, but also one of the leading causes of conflict within organizations is lack of clarity, is ambiguity. Are we all working towards the same purpose? So I think when we find ourselves in this kind of cloud, this VUCA cloud, some of those tactics that I was talking about at the beginning of the hour for how do we take our learning, how do we make meaning in real time, that activity can serve us to help bring us back to clarity, to clarity of purpose, to what am I doing in this moment? When there's so much that's inviting me to be scattered and that invites my leadership, my attention, my team to be scattered and less effective. What are the questions we can ask and the things that we can do to bring us back to focus and efficacy? So one of the pieces that I found coming up over and over again as I was exploring this for our conversation today was that when you are in VUCA times, what then becomes required of us is resilience and adaptability. Because what we did before that got us through what was happening before may not still be the same set of tools that's going to get us through what we're dealing with here today. So when I think about how to frame our time together, part of what I want to frame it around is how do we identify what we're doing? How do we gain or regain clarity? And how do we foster resilience and adaptability? So as opposed to having a set of directions for how to get somewhere, instead what I want to do is give you all a map and some additional tools in the form of powerful questions that you can bring to bear to bring your focus back. One of the other things I saw, some of the folks who were really kind of deep into thinking about this whole VUCA, I don't know a better phrasing. I don't know how to put it any more succinctly than that. These VUCA times is oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm looking down. I've got like a couple pages of notes that I was thinking I wanted to pull ideas from, and just then my brain decided to pull two ideas at once, and I'm not quite sure which direction to go in, so I'm just going to pick one. So in order to navigate these times successfully, what you need is clarity around what are your foundational beliefs. And in education, we think about foundational beliefs often in we put them into two categories. And Ian will have fun with the idea of, two people, oh gosh, how did you frame your joke from last week? There's two kinds of people, the kind of people that think there's two kinds of people, and then everybody else. But so in education, we think about our foundational beliefs in terms of either a growth mindset, which is the idea that I'm going to continue to learn and get better over time. So what I can do right now is a reflection only of what I can do right now. It is not a reflection of the limitations of what might be possible. Versus a fixed mindset, which is the idea that like you're born with certain abilities and you're either going to be good at something or bad at something. And we have found over time that the more you can help children, and I have a bias that just about anything that helps children to think better also tend to be things that will help adults think better too. And so the more you can foster within children the idea that I am learning, I am practicing, and I am getting better, the faster they will learn, the better they will learn, the more they will embody that learning and growth. Versus if you think, well, you're doing well, you got an A in math because you're good at math, sweetie. That would be a fixed mindset, and that ends up being it. In some ways, I think people try and use those kinds of phrases as compliments, like, oh, you're very good at that. And what we found is it's much better to compliment, instead of saying someone is inherently good at something, to compliment the effort that they put into getting where they are, to build up, to lift in terms of visibility and attention to the idea that you can grow and get better. And that is a mindset that serves us well at this time. So in order to navigate VUCA times, we need clarity around our foundational beliefs and preferably invest in beliefs that have to do with the idea that I can get better at navigating these kinds of times as a leader, as a team, as a person. Clarity around your values. And clarity around what your goal or your aspiration is. And I think of that as building kind of touchstones that you keep coming back to, because you're going to keep getting distracted. One of the folks that I was reading talked about the idea that disruption isn't a hurdle anymore. It is the new normal, right? You're going to continue to get disrupted from what you're doing. You're going to continue to get distracted. There's always going to be something you can go digging in on your phone or your computer to avoid the thing that you're wanting to do. So touchstones around like this idea of what is my purpose, what are the values that I bring to that purpose, those having clarity about the answers to those questions, and then having a way that you bring yourself back to it is I think one of the solutions to one of the balms, I guess, to the frustrations of these times. So what we're going to do here today is I'm going to pose some questions and we're going to walk through an example, but this idea you can bring to any question. So today what I'm going to ask you to do is, if we frame this question, what's the so what of this? The so what could be, you can frame so what as being any number of things. It could be your bottom line. What's the bottom line of this? It could be kind of the core essence. What's the center? What's the heart of this thing? What you could say the so what is the top priority? What's the top priority of this? What's the desired outcome? What's the goal? So then the beauty of this, think of the sentence, what's the so what of it, as like as a fill in the blank, like choose your own adventure puzzle. So and then so what, you can fill in so what to be? That's where I was saying, that's your purpose? What's the purpose of this? What's the top priority of this? What's the goal of this? And then another way to frame is what really matters about this. And then this is the other fill in the blank thing for you. So your this could be your current project. It could be, I'm entering what I think of as being kind of the second act of my career. You know, I'm 30 years into doing communications and leadership work, and I'm not quite 50. And depending on how long I decide to work, I got another 20 or 30 years ahead of me of doing this kind of work. So I'm kind of in the middle. So for me, what's the so what of my second half of my career? What do I want that to be about? That could be a question. What is it about? What's going to excite me for the second half of my career? This could be, sometimes we're in the middle of a crisis of faith. What's the purpose of my faith? What's the value? What's the priority that I place on my faith? What's the benefit that my faith brings into my world, my family, my spheres of influence? This could be something that you are feeling really obligated to do, but not at all excited about. Like I've said I'll do this thing and I hate it, but now I got to do it. So I'll be better able to do it if I figure out what's the so what of it. Why does it matter? So I would like for you to think through, for purposes of our time together today, how you would write that sentence. Like, and it doesn't have to be a forever thing, because we're going to do it together today so that you have experience doing it. Then you can bring this question to other parts of your life. You can rewrite the fill in your adventure sentence over and over and over again. But I'm going to give you, while you kind of give that some thought, because I'll bump us out into, we're going to do breakout rooms a couple times today, just for a few minutes each time, but to give you a chance to talk with each other in smaller groups. But before we go in, one of the first questions, I'm going to ask you to share with each other your sentence, you know, your version of what's the so what of this. I'd like for you to be able to share with each other what your problem of practice, what your goal, whatever it is that you want to use to play with here today. I'd like you to have that sentence ready to share in just a moment. And so while you put some closing touches on that, I'm going to share a brief activity. I'm going to describe an activity that I have seen done. It's an older activity, probably 20 or 25 years back. So I think most of you will probably be familiar with it, but I think it's a nice analogy. And so the person at the front of a big group of people was asking someone to fill up a container, and they had big rocks, they had small rocks, they had pebbles, they had sand, and they had water. And they were asked to, as the analogy, to say, like, the big rocks are the really important things in your life. The smaller rocks are also important, but, you know, less so. The sand and the water are the things that kind of fill your day. You know, but let's fill up a day. And they had the first person do it by putting in, well, you know, you spend so much time per day brushing your teeth and doing these other things. So let's pour some sand into this, you know, big glass jar. And you're going to do these other things. Let's pour some more sand and throw a few pebbles in there. And essentially the jar gets filled up with all these smaller things. And then, you know, how do you fit the big rocks? You know, how do you fit your role as a parent? You know, arguably the most important thing that most of us who choose to be parents, that's about the most important thing that most of us will do in our lives, is how do we invest ourselves in raising beautiful and thoughtful humans. And yet, if you filled up that container with the sand and the small pebbles, what you find is there's no room for those larger rocks. And so the, you know, kind of the visceral part of the activity was that they then suggested that, you know, we should attend to those big rocks first. So they would bring out another glass base, and they would say, let's put that parenthood piece, let's put that career, that bigger career goal, purpose. Let's put your faith, whatever those things are that to you are the reasons that life has meaning. Let's make room for those in your life first before we then go pouring in all of the little things. And some of those little things matter, right? Like if I don't brush my teeth every day, I'm going to pay for that later. So it's not to say that those things don't matter, but if you prioritize your time around the little things, you very quickly will lose room for the big things. And we'll talk about that analogy. It'll pop up again a little later here as well. But Bill, I'd like to ask you to go ahead and create the breakout rooms. We're going to have just either 2 or 3 to a room. So really just a small conversation, and we'll break out another time or two today. So you'll get to break out with different people. And I'm thinking just maybe 4 or 5 minutes. I'd like for you to share how you phrase the so what of it. And what I'd like for you to be thinking about, and what you might ask each other to help prompt thoughtful conversation, is why does this matter? All right, Bill, are you ready to help us over? Okay.
Yep. Alexa, set timer for 45 seconds.
45-second timer started.
Alexa, turn off timer.
Welcome back, friends. I hope you had juicy conversations in your breakout rooms.
We did, but we lost
Good.
John mid-sentence. So
That's classic. Though.
yeah.
Well, one of the things I noticed in the room that I was in, and I think this is probably might ring true, might resonate with those of you in other rooms too, is that, folks who come to In Thinking networks, we seldom come with really simple things in mind, right? Like we're often thinking about complex systems, and that showed up in the question around like, what's the so what of this? I think there was a tendency to want to share the larger context with each other. And I think that does matter because, we're trained to think in terms of context and interrelationships. So what I would encourage you to think about is how to zone in on that problem of practice. And so a couple of questions that I think can be really helpful to give you kind of the elevator speech or kind of cut right to the heart of it is, why does this matter? Why does this thing that you are working on, that you love, that you care about, why does it matter? And another really common question pair that I really love is, why this? Why now? Because there's lots of really cool things we could be doing. Why are we doing this? And why does it matter now? And so if you can answer those questions, why does this matter? Why does this matter now? That can be useful to you as a person or to you as a team. Because again, that idea that a lot of workplace and organizational conflict comes from ambiguity. So if everybody on your team can answer the question, why are we doing this? And why are we doing it now? Why is this more important than the 17 other things on our list? Like if we have to say this is our top priority, why? And so spend time as a team having a conversation, making sure that you all share the same perspective on why are you doing this and why are you doing it now? And I also want to pause and make space for you all to share if there was something else that bubbled up from in your breakout. The now clock. Nice, Bill. Because it is always now.
Correct.
That is lovely. So were there any other kind of ahas or just reflections that caught your ear when you were in your breakout rooms? Anything else to share?
I'll speak up. I think, Bill, either subconsciously you put like people together or
All random.
we all pretty much had the same thing that mattered, being the question, and the same kind of objective. So part of that has to do with us being at the ends of our traditional careers and looking forward into how do we help others that are still in their traditional careers going forward into what we might call retirement. So we had that commonality between the three of us.
Yeah, how do you bring intention to that space, right? Because it's and when I think about the what's the so what of this, what's the this can be when you're starting something out. It can be I'm starting a new job, or I've got this new project ahead of me. What's the so what of this new job? What's the so what of this project? It can also be a really great question at the end. What was the so what of this? What did I glean from my career that I can pass to the next generation?
Yeah.
What I've gleaned from the past, how does it feed me, as I transition into something different? It can be a great question at times of transition too. Well, lovely that the accidental or not, lovely that you all had some commonality to explore.
Yep. John and Yoshi, if there's anything else that you want to say about that, I just kind of put it out there. No? Okay.
Trendsetter, you said it well, evidently.
Well enough.
So a couple other sets of questions that help us come back to the why it matters is if you can gain clarity on your values. This is another thing that a few of you who have attended sessions with Joel and Michelle Levy will recognize. They often have invited us to reflect on what our core values are. And that can sometimes feel like a bit of fluff work, that when you're putting together your mission, your vision statements for a project or for an organization or for you as a person, I think sometimes that question around values feels, like we're doing it so that we can check a box. And what I would like to tell you is that if you really bring the question why, and because of our time limitations, I'm not going to walk us through a values exercise right now. But one of the exercises that the Levys walked us through was almost something like a card game where you were collecting different values and seeing how they fit for you and which ones you would want to hold on to versus which ones might be a really meaningful value but aren't ones that are core to you, right? Like there's 1,000 meaningful, beautiful values you could hold, but which are the ones that resonate for yourself? And what I would say is, what I often pair a values exercise with is a set of questions around, and how did these values help me to be more effective? How do these values help our team do what we want to do together? If you're talking about, if you're pulling the values out of your mission and vision statement, how do these values make our work meaningful? How do they drive us? So if I've got a value around honesty, how does that show up in terms of maintaining clarity in this project? If I have a value around work ethic, how does that show up? Why do I have that? Why is often a really powerful question, right? Like Simon, if you want to dig into the questions around why more, Simon Sinek is a great one to dig into. He's got a good TED Talk and a couple of good books out, but he really explores and advocates that why is a more powerful question than what or how. And I have found that to be true. If you can dig into that. And then another powerful set of questions that I think when we're dealing with these VUCA times where we get pulled and distracted and disrupted is, what are your distractions? Because your distractions are not going to be the same as my distractions. So, and I also do this as a team activity. Identify what are the things that are likely to take us off course? What are the things that I use as an excuse to not do this thing that's really important? And to kind of go back to that big rocks activity, one of our other, Bill Bellows, I'm forgetting the name. He's about my height. We've had him do some very interactive activities a number of times, but one of the analogies he uses is that sometimes when we get sideways with another person or when we find ourselves distracted, he used the analogy of a pebble in your shoe, like that that there's often things that show up like a pebble in your shoe. And if you just don't, and sometimes we don't talk about them, like if it's a conflict with another person, we think, well, if I talk about it, that's going to make it bigger. But actually, you keep walking with that pebble in your shoe, and along about, the 5 kilometer mark, you've got a bruise on your heel, right? Like it's no longer just an irritant, it's an injury. And I think of these, the distractions also are sort of a pebble in your shoe. And how do we, at a systems level, identify what are the things that are likely to be a distraction? And then once you identify them, you can mitigate them. But we often don't talk about our distractions up front. And so then they just keep sneakily, like they keep hooking us. And there we are, we're off to the races dealing with the distraction instead of coming back to our core focus. And so I think we've got 5 minutes. Is that right, Bill?
Yes.
Are we done at 11? Okay. Then what I want to close with, so we won't end up doing a second breakout session. I think our introductions ran a little bit long this morning, so I'm going to squeeze up. I want to close with a couple of key ideas, and one of them is you don't necessarily need to have a whole plan laid out in order to be effective. But what you do need is clarity on why the thing that you're dealing with matters. So why this, why now? Clarity around what is it you're doing? What is this thing? What is the this? What is the so what of it? And what is the this? And the next step. You don't necessarily need all 27 steps, but you often, if you don't walk away with what is my next step, you can get mired in all the distractions, all the different pebbles in your shoes. So I want to give you a moment, since we took a little time for you to clarify what is a problem of practice that I'm working on right now, or a transition or a goal. I'd like to give you a moment of quiet to just think about what is one thing that I need to do to advance that goal or that idea or that problem of practice. Maybe it's somebody you need to call because you need to connect with them over it. Maybe you're aware that there's a gap in your knowledge, so you need to do a little homework to fill in an area of your understanding that relates to this thing that you're doing. But what is one thing that you could do that would advance your problem of practice? And then the other piece I would leave you with is to invite you to come back to those powerful questions. What's the so what of this? You're dealing with 75 different things, but at the heart of it, what is the so what of it? Why does this thing matter? Why are you doing this thing? Why are you doing it now? And if that question feels clunky to you, think of how you might phrase the question in a way that feels natural to you, so that you can come back to it. And what I would encourage you to do is write it onto a Post-it or something that you can stick up and see. So if it's in your notepad, put it on a fresh piece of paper and tear that out and put it somewhere visible, or write it across the front of your notepad if you're going old school, which I like old school as well. But don't just fold it away. Don't just write it somewhere and then it gets folded off into your notepad. Phrase that question. Give yourself a question that brings you back to present moment awareness and brings you back to that point of clarity around why this thing that you're doing matters. Why is it worth overcoming all of the distractions and disruptions to keep coming back to it? That's the heart of it. Why does this matter? And keep reminding yourself of that, because that'll give you motivation to keep going and to keep bringing your attention back to that thing. In the midst of 100 other things you could put your attention on, this thing matters, and it matters to you for reasons that you have articulated. And if you haven't yet articulated it here in this hour, I encourage you this could be one of those driving thoughts, while you're off doing something else where you have room to think about things, when you're going for a run or doing whatever you like to do, baking bread. whatever the thing is that also gives you a little bit of mental space to think about something else. I encourage you to come back and keep thinking about this question until you can articulate for yourself, what is the so what of this thing? Why does this matter? And why am I focused on it? And so I hope to see many of your beautiful faces in person in July. And thank you for spending an hour thinking together about the things that matter to you and to each other. And I wish you a really beautiful day. Bill, is there anything you want to say to close out?
No,
All
I
right.
can't follow that.
Hey,
No.
Jamie, I have just something I remember from Joel and Michelle's presentation many years back. And they did talk about VUCA a little bit, but they also talked about the opposite of VUCA. I don't know if you remember, I think either I'm dreaming this or it actually did happen, but they talked about volatility, uncertainty, and complexity and ambiguity. And they turned it upside down to vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. Do you remember that?
I did not remember that, but I'm really grateful you do.
Yeah, so, and I do bring up VUCA quite a bit when I talk to people. You know, everybody wants things nice and tidy. Well, you don't get that in this world. You have to, just like Deming talks about variation as being something you have to acknowledge and accept. Volatility, VUCA is just like that, except has four facets to it. So how, Deming creates a structure for addressing variability, but Joel and Michelle also created the structure of dealing with VUCA by creating a vision, get as much understanding. It doesn't have to be a complete understanding, but make sure that you understand. And then have clarity of what you see, what you can. Again, it doesn't have to be absolute, but then agility to be able to move back and forth. And you talked earlier about, having 147 steps that you have to execute. Well, in a VUCA world, you don't get to do that, but you could have certainty about the 5 steps that you're going to take. And at the end of those 5 steps, what are you going to learn that tells you whether you want to take branch A or branch B? And that's the agility part that comes in. And I always have plans, but every plan has branches in it. So to acknowledge the fact that I'm not going to know everything. If I already knew everything, then why would I bother doing anything at all? Anyways, I just wanted to flip the VUCA thing on its side and share that with you.
I'm so glad you did. And I think I missed the U twice for their, so vision, clarity, agility, but what did they flip for uncertainty? Understanding.
Yeah, I think that's what I recall.
Thank you for that. Lovely.
My pleasure, absolutely.
Are there other, there's not, I think we wanted to kind of wrap up at 11 so that those who needed to go right at 11 felt that they could do so. But if others want to stick around and chat for a few minutes, we certainly can. And I'm curious if there were other ideas that rose up for you as you're talking to each other, thinking about these things.
We didn't have long to talk.
Fair.
I think we could have gone on for another hour.
Nice.
But I just had a thought about the why now piece of what you were recommending as one of our forward considerations. I don't think the temporality came into our conversation much, other than in the context of before and after retirement. But why now? Am I the only one that struggles with this? My self-discipline has deteriorated significantly since I retired. And trying to stay focused and on track on my goals is nothing like what it used to be when I was being paid to do so. So maybe I need to come up with a way to understand how what matters compensates me to keep me better focused. It may not be a tangible compensation, but how is it that anything I do these days matters enough for me to stay focused on it? I'm turned into a squirrel chaser, my my ADHD or whatever you want to call it, has gone wild. So am I the only one in that boat?
I'm gonna say no, you're not. And I don't think it's just about retirement. I think it's also post-pandemic. I think that really shifted our relationship to how we gain information. Nice, Bill. I like that. Retire, redefine work and play. Um, but I also think part of it is there is a discipline that comes with patterns. And those patterns got disrupted for you,
Yeah.
And so how do you create new patterns that will, because we talk about trying to learn habits, right? Like a lot of times we think, oh, it's like a white knuckle exercise, like I'm just gonna force myself to do this new thing. And that's not really how habits are best formed, right? They're best formed if you can hook them on something that you already do. So for instance, that's why they are telling us now that, like to when you're you can't see me, but I'm standing. And so like they say, like when you brush your teeth, practice standing on one foot so that as we age, you maintain good balance because you're already brushing your teeth twice a day. So you're not having to build a new habit of spending a minute or two every day standing on one foot. You add that new thing to a pre-existing habit and it makes it much quicker. Whereas if you just say, oh, I'm gonna stand on one foot for a few minutes every day, the odds that you're gonna remember to do it are pretty low. And so I wonder, as you talk about your retirement, what are the habits that you can hook your goals, your retirement level goals? How do you hook them into something that you're doing every day?
I like that. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because part of why you were so effective at work was you went to work 5 days a week, right? Like you went off and had focused time spent on that thing for X number of hours every week. And we don't really have that same kind of consistency in retirement unless we choose it.
Yeah, maybe I'll take another look at that book, The Power of Habits, because I think it talks a lot about how these things can compound upon one another. And that's similar to what you're saying here. If we hook them together, they become significantly more powerful. Okay, I like that. Thanks.
Yeah.
A question, or say if it's retirement, and I moved out to a retirement community in the last year because of age and my health a little bit, but the question I discover more is a challenge of being engaged, but the pace at which people in careers have either been led to work faster and faster. So sometimes people say to me, where do you work? As if work is punitive. And depending on where you are in the country, if you're up around Bentonville, where do you work? I mean, is it a question of moving faster? Or if you're truer to yourself, do you slow up more to hear someone or to hear your own brain? Because if people say, why did you do this? It's almost like the police have arrived and we become defensive. But to really go to a soul level, so to speak, then how does one advance an awakening of awareness to where better work could be done, but understanding systems thinking, and even looking at Peter Schulte's work. I started looking at this last week. What was fascinating to me was the reference to the train, but there's no reference to the beginning of when they created the time zones in Chicago for keeping the trains on track. So with a cell phone, computer, here's the nature of time itself. It's just mind-boggling. But that's what I'd even focus on when I did the MFA program. I was calling the U.S. Department of Commerce, asking if they knew of an art type. So they referenced me to Virgie Vosenhoven in Europe, who looks at how the brain processes time. But the construct of time itself, it's not to me a tick off. It's sort of how you slow it up with your time left. I'm not in a rush to complete the race, but there is a certain curiosity I've always had. of how something really works, and to take it apart, put it together again, take it apart. Do we get stronger? Or to understand really it will look different each time.
You do bring an artist's mind to these kinds of questions in a way that I think is very welcome, because it invites us to think differently about it.
Well, thank
You
you.
know,
I finished a recent piece. It took me a long time, but it was about the penny, the Lincoln National Bank in Kentucky, and the disappearance of the penny. So when you think of something's tactile, then what are we doing? I mean, where will people ground themselves if the technology is so focused, I mean, to going into outer space, but where's your energy coming from to sustain cleaner, better, healthier communities and cities?
Yeah.
And economies?
Bill Bellows, it looked like for a moment you had this like leaning in thought.
But well, two things come to mind, Jimmy, is one is, and I think back to 10 years ago versus today, I don't spend a half hour to 45 minutes commuting to work each day. But there's a time, my last 10 years at Rocketdyne, there was a period where I was traveling every week. Every week. I was rarely in my office. So in that time frame, there's a lot I wasn't paying attention to. And what's going on in the world. I am far more aware of what's going on in the world today than ever before. And that is more than the amount of time that I wasn't spending traveling.
Right.
And so I find is, when you talk about what's going on, and it's not a pandemic thing, is there's just a whole bunch of stuff I did not know was going on, period.
Right.
And now I am, and I think all of us are likely, between social media and the access to news, probably, and go back to your point, Diane, what did I accomplish today? I think a lot of time is spent concerned about that. That's just what comes to mind.
Well, and that brings me two thoughts. One is, this idea of shrinking our sphere of concern to better match our sphere of influence. Because, as we become more aware of global issues and just all the things, right? Like the stuff that we're aware of is a much larger pool of stuff than it was 10 or 20 years ago for the average person. And that also contributes to that sense of being scattered. But our sphere of influence is typically smaller. Like, what can I actually influence? What do I have the capacity to change? That's going to be this size. What do I care about? What am I interested in? Right? Like that's, as big as my arms can go wide. And there's a school of thought around narrowing that sphere of focus of concern to more accurately match my sphere of influence, to not that I don't care about those other things, but that I keep them in perspective of that stuff that's happening that is outside my sphere of control. And so worrying about it is not going to make me healthier and is not going to change the outcomes for that bigger thing. So how do I then, narrow my focus into the things that I actually, can influence and control? And the other thing that came to mind is another perfectly valid use of the question, what's the so what of this, is what's my purpose behind scrolling for the next hour? I'm going to set a timer. Instead of scrolling for 3 hours, I'm going to give myself 30 minutes. That's my social media scrolling time. And what's my purpose for it? Am I scrolling to look at what my friends have posted and maintain connection to them? Am I scrolling because that's where I get my news now? What is my purpose? They have found that amongst teenagers, if you train them to teach them and they build a habit to ask that question to essentially identify what's their purpose behind going on social media, it is a protective factor. It helps minimize, because social media is a mental health threat to teenagers for lots of different reasons. And a protective factor is if they go into their scrolling with clarity of purpose. So you can ask that same question: what's the so what of my social media scrolling? What's the purpose of it? And as we are in systems thinkers, we are experimenters extraordinaire, right? So use it as an experiment. Try this week. Every time you go on social media, decide how long you're willing to be there. And if the answer to that question is 2 hours, then don't feel guilty about it. Give yourself 2 hours. You know, like the factor you're experimenting with is your sense of purpose, not necessarily changing time. Although once you have more clarity around your purpose, you might then also adjust your time. But anyway, just what you shared, Bill, made me think of that. Well, friends, we're about 15 minutes over on time. Is there any other kind of big thought before we close out our session today?
Well, I kind of posted one here, and it sounds to me like a lot of what we've been discussing for the last 10 minutes is, am I a spectator of my life, or am I participating in it?
Yeah.
Right. And by being able to answer the what's the so what of this, using some of the tools you shared, maybe we can stop being more on the spectator side and start being more on the participant side.
Exactly.
Just a thought.
I think it's a beautiful thought, and I appreciate it. And I do think that's part of, part of my work is to go support public leaders in emergency management scenarios. And one of the pieces that I often will talk to them about is around intentionality. You know, that when you're dealing with a crisis, people's awareness gets heightened, and the things you do and say during a crisis will get remembered at a greater level than the things you do and say on just an average day. And that, Victoria, nice to see you.
Well, that's why I used to create crises. So
And
people
you aren't
remember
alone in
things.
that. You aren't alone in that.
I'd make it a crisis just so I could get people's attention.
Yeah. And so then how do we find a more successful, like if it turns out that creating the crises has unintended consequences that you don't like, what else can you do?
Well, there's positive crises and
there you go, right?
unfavorable
Urgency
crises.
is another word for that, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, these are the kinds of things I love to spend time thinking about. It's why I've appreciated Bill and the planning team for putting me into that closing session each year, because this is the kind of stuff that I spend my wheels thinking about, is why does this matter and how are we going to be different as a result of this time that we spend together today and in July. And so I hope that these questions are useful to you as you think about these things too.
Thank you, Jaime.
You too, friends. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you
you.
all.
Nicely
Have a
done,
great
Jamie.
life.
Take care.
Have a great life. Go well.
Igualmente, amigos.
I love any presentation that doesn't rely on PowerPoint slides, Jamie.
Oh, how funny.
Diversity.
We'll talk again soon. Take care.
Okay.
You bet. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.